My name is Sujian. Right now, I'm sitting on the edge of that single bed at the Vanguard Awakener Academy, which is as hard as an iron plate, looking at the notice for overdue living allowance, and letting out a deep sigh. 10 years ago, the world was abuzz with the legend of the Skybreaker Hunter. They said that the mysterious warrior in the black mask had single-handedly stormed into the obsidian rift above Seoul and saved all of humanity. They even erected a 10-meter-tall statue of me in the city center square and compiled my heroic deeds into a book that every elementary school student was required to read. But the truth is often so ridiculous that it makes you want to laugh. Last year, I barely managed to slay a behemoth the size of a subway train with a small plastic soup spoon, partly because that beast was so blind as to interrupt my last box of strawberry sundaes. As for that mysterious mask that strikes fear into the hearts of the world's top awakened beings, it was nothing more than my utterly unreliable uncle knocking on my family's grave helmet. As for saving the world, that was purely an accident. At the time, I just thought that dark, gaping crevice was too small, buzzing incessantly like a fly, so I kicked it in, but I pushed too hard and got stuck. In that hellish place known as the Obsidian Rift, the time tunnel is completely separate from the outside world. 10 years have passed since I was a toddler, while in my fishing expedition, I endured 300 years in that desolate place where even light seemed to bend. I formed a sworn brotherhood with a grumpy wooden door that spoke in Shakespearean theatrical jargon, secretly learned 3.5 sets of unparalleled sword techniques from those ancient emperors who had turned to dust, and incidentally, because I stubbornly refused to admit that I had no sense of direction, I spent a full 40 years staring blankly at an ancient, fallen star beast in a dead-end cave. When I finally managed to devour all those annoying void monsters like snacks and kicked open the spatial barrier to return to the human world, I knew that my 8-year-old body had finally recovered to the normal state of a 20-year-old after being flushed by energy. I looked at the brand new name on my ID card, he and I, and simply dissected and rearranged the 3 characters I knew, replacing them with a plain-sounding syllable. I swore I never wanted to be some kind of damn savior again. Saving the world is a thankless and arduous task. Not only is there no overtime pay, but you even have to pay for your own mask. I'm tired. I'm just barely managing to get through that ordinary college life. 2 meat buns for breakfast, grabbing half a portion of braised pork at the cafeteria for lunch, and chatting and joking with my roommates in the dorm at night. To fully integrate into this society, I sealed away all 78 layers of that terrifying magic power that could crush the earth into a marble. Now, in the Awakener administration's files, I'm just a pathetic F-rank useless person with pitiful magic power, unable to even defeat a stray dog on the street. Knock, knock, knock. The dormitory door was rudely knocked on. Before I could even speak, the door was flung open. Standing outside was a middle-aged man dressed as a black-clad instructor, a half-smoked cigarette always dangling from his lips. His name was Park Kwang-soo, the academy's notorious chain smoker and the proctor for my first test. A former high-ranking mercenary, now the scapegoat responsible for the daily routines of the academy's hapless class. Sujian, right? Stop dawdling, the entrance exam is about to start. If you don't submit passing data for the physical fitness test this year, you won't even be qualified to sleep on the streets. Park Kwang-soo, a cigarette dangling from his lips, swept his cloudy eyes over me, his gaze carrying an air of world-weariness. I quickly stuffed the overdue payment notice under my pillow, put on a worried expression as if I had a cold, and nervously rubbed my hands together. Instructor Park, I'm physically weak, and a strong wind might make me feel unwell. Maybe I should just apply to withdraw from school after this assessment? Drop out? Dream on. Park Kwang-soo scoffed, exhaling a thick smoke ring. The academy just got a makeup class this year, and we're just looking for a few bottom-tier students to highlight the talents of those rich kids. Enough talk, come with me. If you're late, I'll dock your food allowance for a month. Hearing about the issue of food rights being taken away, my expression immediately changed. For me right now, that pot of potato and beef stew in the cafeteria, which is said to be able to instill an iron will, is my only spiritual pillar for maintaining my status as an ordinary person. Instructor, don't be angry, I'm coming. I jogged after him. Inside the monument, a sea of people filled the room. Several representatives from the Great Awakeners Guild sat on the platform, one of them arrogant and seemingly wanting to proclaim, "I'm an aristocrat," on his forehead. A massive, translucent magic crystal stood on the platform, radiating a ghostly blue light. "Next up, Su Jian." A cold, synthesized electronic voice emanated from the loudspeaker. I took a deep breath and strode heavily onto the stage. A burst of undisguised snickers immediately erupted around me. Everyone knew that those who, in their old age, came to the Awakened Academy to renew their enrollment were basically half-crippled individuals who couldn't make it in society, or had failed in their magical awakening. I gently placed my palm on that block, applying the shimmering magic crystal. In that instant, deep within my consciousness, I sensed the seal trembling violently. If I were to release even a fraction of its power, this magical crystal of Lianqing would not only instantly explode into dust, but a stadium capable of holding 10 people would also be sent flying into the sky, and even the moon would tremble. I quickly recited the heart-cleansing mantra in my mind, pressing the energy in my body back to the deepest part of my dantian. Buzz! The crystal returned to calm, a faint, almost invisible red light appeared, and a bright red number popped up, 3. Magic power value 3. Rating F. The female staff member in charge of recording didn't even bother to lift her head, her tone full of impatience. Next. Haha, magic power level 3? My watchdog is 100 times stronger than him. A piercing laugh suddenly erupted from the crowd. I looked in the direction of the sound and saw a young man wearing custom-made Fire Lion Guild armor standing with his arms crossed, looking down at me with an air of superiority. His name was Chuanwu, the eldest son of the Fire Lion Guild's leader, a genius awakener born with a silver spoon in his mouth. The young man had already obtained B-level certification, and his arrogance was practically off the charts. Chuanwu strode to my side, mentally shoving me with his shoulder, and sneered. "Hey, you piece of trash surnamed Su, don't you dare use too much force during the heavy force testing later. If you can't even get the machine to start, it'll be a disgrace to the entire Awakener Academy. How about this, you kowtow to me 3 times, and I'll protect you. I promise I won't let the goblins eat you for supper." I rubbed my shoulder, which was still sore from his bump. Of course, I was just pretending. With my current physical strength, if he had bumped into me like that, I would have definitely hit his collarbone. I lowered my head and said timidly, "Young Master Chu is right. I'm not very capable. I'll definitely stay away from the force measuring machine later, and won't cause any trouble for everyone." "You're smart to know what's good for you." Chu Wenwu snorted coldly, pointing arrogantly at the force measuring machine. The second test was physical fitness and explosive power. As the focus of the entire event, Chu Wenwu was naturally the first to appear. He used the Fire Lion Guild's ultimate technique, Raging Flames, and his fist was instantly covered with a layer of blazing red light as he slammed it into the heavy force testing machine with a whooshing sound. Bang! With a loud bang, the screen of the force measuring machine flickered wildly, finally settling on an astonishing number, 20,000 points. A gasp and a wave of flattery immediately swept through the room. Chu Wendy smugly withdrew his fist, giving me a defiant glare, his eyes seeming to say, "Didn't you see? This is the difference between an ordinary person and a genius." Next, Su Jian. Instructor Park Kwang-soo, with a cigarette dangling from his lips, glanced at me out of the corner of his eye, his tone indifferent. I shuffled over to the force measuring machine, which was as tall as a 2-story building. To be honest, this thing looked to me as fragile as paper. I calculated that, based on my F-level character setting, this punch should only get me a mediocre score of around 800 points, either too outstanding nor enough to get me expelled on the spot. But just as I clenched my fist, a green bottlefly, oblivious to its own mortality, swatted the force measuring machine right in the center, and then arrogantly rubbed its front legs together. I have severe obsessive-compulsive disorder, and I especially can't stand seeing these dirty little insects hovering in front of me. I subconsciously shifted the angle of my fist slightly, and due to this natural reaction, a trace of power within me leaked out uncontrollably. Boom! That wasn't the sound of a blow. It was the mournful cry of the entire stadium before its collapse and exhaustion. Under my master's watchful eye, I even breathed into the machine. The force of my punch completely vaporized the heavy force measuring machine in the air, leaving not a single part behind. In this way, the invisible airflow unleashed by my fist was like a giant axe that split the heavens and the earth, directly piercing through the load-bearing walls of the theater, the abandoned underground garage, the neon-lit bus advertisements on the street, and finally blasting 3 vending machines on the roadside into dust. The entire final match fell into an eerie silence. The 10 students, the current mentor, and the guild leader on the podium all gaped, their eyes nearly popping out of their sockets. The air seemed to freeze at that moment. You could hear a pin drop. I stared blankly at the empty space ahead, and thought to myself, oh no, I used too much force. I quickly turned around, a few beads of cold sweat appearing on my forehead. I grabbed the arm of instructor Park Kwang-soo, who was staring in disbelief, and said in a trembling voice, "Instructor! This machine is of terrible quality. It exploded by itself. It really has nothing to do with me. I hadn't even used all my strength, how could it break on its own? Did the school buy some substandard or counterfeit products? I'm going to file a complaint with the Consumer Association." Park Kwang-soo took a deep drag on his cigarette, oblivious to the burn on his fingers from the butt. He stared at the enormous black hole that had suddenly appeared before him, then at my innocent-looking face, which was filled with a look of utter grievance. The old smoker was an old smoker after all. After a brief moment of astonishment, his brain quickly came to a logical conclusion. He knew this kid's background all too well. Someone who could blast a force gauge to smithereens was definitely not some F-level cripple. However, since the kid was going to such lengths to hide his identity, it meant there was more to it than met the eye. Park Kwang-soo coughed, slapped my hand away, and roared with a dark face, "What are you all looking at? Haven't you ever seen outdated and scarce equipment? The college's budget was already tight this year, and you bought a batch of unregistered and substandard backup force measuring machines. This is simply ridiculous." He turned his head, glared at me fiercely, and said through gritted teeth in a low voice, "Su-Jian, right? 10 yuan deducted for equipment damage repair. Data record, 799 points. Get the hell back to the queue." "Thank you, instructor. You're such a great person." I patted my chest with a sigh of relief and dashed back to the group. Chu Wen-woo stood frozen in place, completely petrified. He stared at the bottomless vacuum, then at his proud 21,000 points, and suddenly realized that his fist-shaped avatar was a joke. The final part of the entrance exam was a practical combat exercise. The rules were simple. All freshmen had to take turns fighting against the A-rank female swordsman Yura for 30 seconds. As long as they could last until the time was up, even if they just lay on the ground pretending to be dead, they would still get a passing grade. The important figures on the platform were clearly still reeling from the shock of the force-measuring machine evaporating. They were whispering among themselves, their eyes occasionally glancing in my direction. I huddled in the far corner of the line, trying to minimize my presence, praying that I would draw a later lot so I would have enough time to think about how to perfectly defeat. Again without arousing suspicion. "Next, Su-Jian." The cold voice from the loudspeaker shattered my illusions. I forced myself out of the line, and a low, gloating chuckle immediately rose around me, especially from Chu Wen-woo, whose previously gloomy face now wore a cruel smile of anticipation. In the center of the arena, Yura stood quietly. She wore a sharply tailored silver swordsman's uniform, a chillingly sharp longsword in her hand, and her long, silver-white hair fluttered slightly in the wind. As the youngest A-rank instructor in the academy, she was not only incredibly powerful but also possessed a pair of eagle eyes that seemed to see through everything. Rumor had it that she had personally witnessed the legendary Skybound Hunter in action amidst the towering waves of Leviathan at Mount Bushio. As soon as I reached the sidelines, Yura's gaze pierced me like a tangible object. That look sent chills down my spine, as if all the carefully crafted disguises I wore were as transparent as paper in her eyes. Begin! The referee's command broke the silence on the field. Almost the instant the signal sounded, Yura moved. Without any unnecessary probing, without any fancy opening moves, her figure left a trail of afterimages in the air, her longsword transforming into a silver lightning bolt, aimed straight for my throat. This sword strike was ridiculously fast, accompanied by a piercing shriek that tore through the air. She was definitely serious. My body's instincts were far faster than my brain. The muscle memory honed over 300 years of fighting in the Obsidian Rift awakened at this moment, an absolutely calm, mechanical reaction in the face of death. When I came to my senses, an extremely awkward scene had unfolded on the field. My right index and middle fingers were firmly clamped in the center of Yura's incredibly sharp long sword. No matter how much magic she channeled into her body, the tip of the sword was less than a centimeter away from my nose, yet it couldn't advance even an inch further. A deathly silence fell over the entire arena. The breaths of the 100,000 students stopped, and the guild leaders on the platform all stood up, staring intently at the center of the arena. Yura's body stiffened abruptly. She looked down at the blade I was gripping tightly between my two fingers, then looked up at me along my arm. Her pupils contracted sharply. The way she held the sword, the slight arc of her feet, even my nonchalant gaze at that moment, all perfectly overlapped with the terrifying figure that had only appeared in top-secret files deep in her memory. That's the signature opening move of the Skyless Hunter. The air seemed to freeze, and I could even hear the cold sweat trickling down my forehead. If my identity were exposed here, my dream of a carefree university life would be completely ruined, and I might even end up being treated like a mascot by these fanatical admirers. In a split second, I had a sudden flash of inspiration. I widened my eyes, pointed my left hand at the air behind Yura, and screamed at the top of my lungs. Holy crap! What the hell is that? It's a huge mutated, highly venomous human-faced spider! Yura was startled instinctively. Her swordsman instincts momentarily distracted her, and her wrist loosened slightly. Now, taking advantage of the moment she loosened her grip, I let out an extremely shrill scream. Like a pig being slaughtered, my eyes rolled back, and I fell straight backward. As I fell, I didn't forget to scrape 2 long gashes on the ground with my heels, creating the visual effect of being blown away by a powerful gust of wind. Bang! I crashed heavily onto the cold ground, my arms and legs spread out, my eyes tightly closed, and my tongue even sticking out slightly, perfectly portraying a useless good-for-nothing who was instantly killed by an A-rank swordsman. The entire venue fell into a long, deathly silence once again. On the podium, Principal Bai Minhao's lips twitched wildly a few times, while Park Kwang-soo, standing on the sidelines, silently took out his cigarette case, lit a cigarette, took a deep drag, and his eyes were filled with the helplessness of, "This kid's acting is so damn fake, but I still have to play along with him." Half a minute later, the referee nervously raised the megaphone. Practical assessment. Instructor Yula wins. Su Jian. Seriously injured and unconscious, sent to the medical room. Several medical staff in white coats rushed onto the field with a stretcher and hurriedly lifted me up. As they passed Yura, I slightly opened my eyes and met her cold, suspicious, and scrutinizing gaze. I quickly closed my eyes again, let out a few weak groans, and continued to play dead. Ultimately, thanks to this spectacular coma performance, I was successfully assigned to Class E, the school's undisputed dumping ground for trash. Class E's classroom was on the ground floor of the teaching building, perpetually devoid of sunlight, and filled with a musty smell mixed with the stench of cheap disinfectant. It was a gathering place for the most academically weak, failed to awaken, expelled from various guilds, or eccentric students, the marginalized students of the entire academy. For someone like me who just wanted to coast through life, this place was paradise. My seat is in the second-to-last row of the classroom, by the window, next to an empty locker. "Hey, newbie, don't block my light!" A cold female voice came from beside me. I turned around and saw a petite girl with pigtails standing next to my desk with her hands on her hips. Her name was Jiang Shuola, a D-level magic user, specializing in spear techniques, and with a temper as fiery as a portable powder keg. This girl hated being looked down upon for her height, even though she was only a little over 1.5 meters tall. I was just about to say hello when I suddenly remembered what my mentor had said. To fit my F-grade loser persona, I subconsciously bent down to tie my shoelaces. But in Jiang Shuola's eyes, this action was blatantly condescending and a naked provocation. "Well, you new good for nothing! You dare to look at me with such contempt as soon as you enter classy? Believe me or not, I'll stab your tattered clothes into a sieve right now with a spear!" Jiang Shuola's face turned red with anger, and she slammed her hand on my desk, making the surrounding air temperature seem to drop several degrees. I squatted down, tying my shoelaces, and looked up with an innocent expression. "Excuse me, my shoelaces just came undone. I swear to God, I have absolutely no intention of disrespecting your height. Really, all I could see were the tips of your shoes. You dare mention height? A duel! See you on the playground after school, or you're a coward!" Jiang Shuola angrily threw down the words, turned around and sat back in his seat, leaving me alone in the wind, bewildered. Before I could even catch my breath, a boy with thick-rimmed glasses sitting in front of me turned around. His name was Li Daoyun, an F-rank healer. Everyone in the academy knew that Li Daoyun's healing abilities were extremely weak. His magic could only be used to treat bruises or minor abrasions on the skin's surface, earning him the nickname King of Minor Injuries. This guy was extremely dedicated. He even went out and printed a box of laminated business cards, handing them out to everyone he met. "Brother, you look a bit gloomy. Have you been getting beaten up a lot lately?" Li Daoyun deftly pulled out a business card and shoved it into my hand, lowering his voice mysteriously. "Here's my contact information. I'll give you a discount since you're new. Only 988 yuan, and I guarantee your bruises will go down within half an hour. How about that, a good deal?" I stared at the golden-bossed words on the business card. King of Minor Injuries, Li Daoyun, specializing in treating bruises, sprains, and insect bites. And my lips twitched involuntarily. I carefully put the card away, about to offer a perfunctory reply, when a deafening snoring suddenly erupted from the last row of the classroom. Following the sound, one could see a tall, pretty girl with huge dark circles under her eyes, fast asleep on the table. Her name was Pei Miluo, a fringe summoner at the academy. It was said that the contracted beast she had summoned with all her might was just an ordinary speckled rooster. That rooster had an incredibly violent temper. Not only was it hostile to all humans, but it also openly attacked the headmaster on the first day of school and even went so far as to peck the bronze statue of the academy's founder with its beak, nearly triggering a school-wide manhunt. At this moment, the unruly rooster was swaggering on Pei Mira's head, looking down at the whole class with its two beady eyes, and making a low, menacing clucking sound. Looking at the rooster, I inexplicably felt a sense of kinship. Among this group of eccentric classmates with their diverse personalities, I suddenly realized that the next 3 years of campus life might not be as boring as I had imagined. However, this peaceful illusion only lasted until the first practical lesson. At 2 p.m., Instructor Park Kwangsu, with a cigarette dangling from his lips, led all of us from Class E to the forbidden underground training dungeon beneath the academy. The air here was cold and damp, and the walls were inlaid with magic stones that emitted an eerie green glow. Park Kwangsu stubbed out his cigarette on the sole of his shoe, turned around and looked at us, this bunch of oddballs, and said irritably, "Cheer up, all of you! Today's mission is simple. Clear out the goblin horde on the first level of the dungeon. Remember, the strongest one inside is only a D-rank goblin ogre. If anyone dies in there, there's no compensation. Got it?" The students pulled out their meager weapons, each one nervously swallowing hard. Even as I walked at the very back, still clutching the half-eaten corn cob I'd swiped from the cafeteria, I felt completely unfazed. Seriously, back in the Obsidian Rift's gap in the ranks, the Starfall beast I'd been munching on as a snack was thicker than this. To expect a former Skybreaker hunter to be tasked with clearing out goblins was practically a humiliation of my fighting prowess. Wait, did you hear anything? Jiang Shula, who was walking at the front, suddenly stopped, gripped the spear in his hand tightly, and his expression changed slightly. Deep underground, a sudden, muffled, thunderous roar of terror erupted. Immediately afterward, the ferocious goblins, as if they had seen a ghost, let out piercing screams and scrambled frantically out of the dark passage, as if some unparalleled horror was chasing them. This is no... Li Daoyun turned pale with fright, instinctively touching the card he was clutching tightly in his hand. This commotion is definitely not something an ordinary goblin could cause. Park Kwangsu's face instantly darkened. He abruptly drew an alloy longsword hidden under his trench coat and shouted, "Everyone on alert! There's a high-level monster of unknown rank nearby." The words had barely left his lips when the rocks beneath the earth suddenly crumbled. At the same time, a nauseating, pungent stench filled the air, and a gigantic monster, as large as a small mountain, was forced out from the depths of the earth. It was a high-level nightmare centipede, its entire body covered in a jet-black shell, countless compound eyes flashing with blood-red light, and its mouth constantly dripping with a potent ape-like fluid. S-rank monster? How could it appear in the school's dungeon? Chu Wenwu happened to be passing by with several senior students when he saw this scene. He was so frightened that he almost dropped his sword. This nightmare giant centipede is an extremely dangerous creature that feeds on magic crystal cores. If it is thoroughly enraged by the extinction of the human awakened race, it will choose to self-destruct. The terrifying energy released would be enough to instantly level the entire Vanguard Awakened Academy and half of Seoul. The entire class leader was terrified. Their legs and face trembled, and they couldn't even muster the thought of running continuously. I stood behind and sighed helplessly. I was really going to quietly finish eating this ear of corn, but this beast just had to be so blind and come out at this moment to ruin my retirement plans. I casually grabbed the rooster, General, which was perched on Pei Mira's head and still swaggering around. The rooster was about to bite me, but I used it as a human-shaped projectile and hurled it precisely at the largest compound eye in the center of the nightmare centipede. Giggle giggle! The rooster let out an extremely loud screech in midair, its two claws landing precisely on the giant centipede's eyeballs, and then kicked it hard. Boom! Taking advantage of the semi-fatal gap in the giant centipede's eye injury, and the moment it tried to snatch the loot, I casually flicked an inconspicuous ordinary pebble off the ground. The pebble tore a barely perceptible spatial rift in the air, carrying unparalleled penetrating power, and instantly pierced the very center of the nightmare centipede's massive head. The colossal nightmare centipede didn't even have time to utter a scream before its massive body froze on the spot, then crashed to the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. Meanwhile, the rooster, General, stood proudly atop the centipede's head, raising its neck and letting out a loud, piercing crow, as if it had single-handedly won the entire battle. The entire room fell silent. The owner stared in disbelief at the scene, his mind completely blank. I quickly clapped off all the things in my hands, then sidled up to the dumbfounded instructor Park Kwangsu and said with a forced smile, "Instructor, look how arrogant this beast was. He must have eaten too much and gotten a sudden infectious disease in the crystal core, then accidentally crashed and died right in front of us." Right. Everyone saw it. It was definitely an accident. Guangzhu gave me a deep look, then glanced at the completely dead S-class giant centipede, took a deep drag on his cigarette, and announced loudly with a forced smile, "Ahem! According to the preliminary assessment by the Academy's expert group, this is a rare case of accidental death caused by a core malfunction of the monster itself. It is unrelated to the investigation in this combat. Everyone, keep your mouths shut. Anyone who dares to spread even a single word will be expelled from the Academy." Although the Academy's official written report forcibly suppressed all the truth, The bizarre scene that had just occurred had already planted deep doubts in the hearts of all the students in Class E. Especially Instructor Yura, who stood in the dark corner, looking at the giant centipede with its bizarre death, her attention lingering on the name that kept her awake at night, the Skyless Hunter. The nightmare of the giant centipede in the underground prison had only been over for a few days, and I thought I could finally catch my breath, but this brief peace was like a soap bubble that was mercilessly burst. At noon, I had just managed to snag a piece of sweet and sour pork ribs that I'd been craving from the cafeteria. Carrying the tin tray with the dean's logo from that day, I ran to the rooftop teaching building, ready to enjoy a moment of peace. But after only a couple of mouthfuls of rice, a bone-chilling cold suddenly swept over me without warning. I sighed, swallowed the piece of pork rib in my mouth, and turned my head away helplessly. Instructor Yura was standing on the edge of the rooftop, the biting cold wind blowing wildly through her long, silver-white hair. Her bony hand gripped the hilt of her sword tightly, her eyes like those of a female leopard locking onto its prey, exuding an undeniable sense of disdain. "Sujian," she said coldly, her voice sharper than the wind. "Where did you learn that move from which you caught my sword barehanded during the practical assessment that day?" I continued to feign a silly expression, looking utterly innocent. "Instructor Yura, what are you talking about? That day, a huge mutated poisonous spider flew through the air, and I was so scared that I slipped and bumped into your sword, and then I passed out. You have no idea, I actually have arachnophobia." "Stop pretending." Yura stepped forward, her sword flashing as it was drawn, its cold light piercingly sharp in the midday sun. "During the Leviathan siege of Bushio Mountain, I was fortunate enough to stand on the periphery. I personally witnessed that man known as the Hunter of the Sky, using the exact same two-finger technique to crush the deep-sea monster's fangs, which were comparable to divine artifacts. Your grip, the subtle arc you maintain when exerting force, even the undisguised ease you exude, it's all identical to his." Before she could even finish speaking, she sprang into action, her longsword transforming into a vast, silvery net that enveloped me. This wasn't a test. It was a prelude to my attack. Still holding the plate full of food, I could only stumble backward, letting out exaggerated screams. Yura's blade grazed my nose, brushed past the hem of my clothes, and shaved off a tuft of hair on my head, each strike incredibly dangerous. Yet, her fierce attacks, so determined to slay B-rank monsters, were all perfectly evaded by me with my exquisitely ugly tripping over my own feet, and falling flat on the ground and deforming myself. Not only that, but I didn't spill a single drop of sauce while eating the sweet and sour pork ribs on my plate. Just as Yura's brows furrowed more and more, preparing to unleash a higher-level killing move, a loud bang rang out, and the heavy iron door of the rooftop was violently kicked open from the outside. Chuanwu, accompanied by several arrogant senior students, swaggered in. When he saw Eula present, he paused for a moment, then gave a perfunctory evening greeting, before pointing his finger directly at me, who was hiding in the corner. "Su Jian, don't think that just because you were lucky enough to escape the dungeon's assessment, you can live a peaceful life in this academy. Today, as the heir of the Fire Lion Guild, I officially challenge you to a ranking duel." Chuanwu smiled broadly, holding a duel document stamped with the Student Council's bright red seal. "If you win, all the pitiful resources of your Class E will be ours. If you lose, you'll get out of the Vanguard Awakener Academy." Upon hearing this, I realized it was a good opportunity to escape. I waved my hands repeatedly, my face full of smiles. "Young Master Chu, please spare me. How could I, a mere F-rank trash, be qualified to fight you? I admit defeat, you can take all the resources, just don't disturb my meal." The more I backed down, the more arrogant Chuanwu became. He sneered, pointed his finger at my nose, and yelled, "Someone as petty as you doesn't deserve to be in the Awakener Academy. Your Class E is full of genetically mutated, useless trash. You're just wasting air by existing." This remark completely enraged everyone. Outside the door, Jiang Shuola, who had secretly followed them, could no longer contain her temper. The petite girl braced herself against the doorframe, holding the gleaming spear upside down in her hand, and rushed in with bloodshot eyes. You surnamed Chu, repeat what you just said again. Jiang Shuola roared angrily, unleashing his full magical power. The spear in his hand transformed into a sharp meteor, piercing straight for Chu Wenwu's face. Chu Wenwu didn't even glance at her, a contemptuous smile playing on his lips. A scorching barrier of flames suddenly erupted around him. The spear slammed into the barrier, and with a sharp crack, Jiang Shuola's prized weapon shattered into pieces. The powerful recoil sent her flying. An overconfident ant. Chu Wenwu sneered, then swung his forehead sharply, unleashing a raging flame lion formed from pure high-temperature magic power, which roared and pounced towards Jiang Shuola in midair. This was a genuine B-rank killing move. If it hit, Jiang Shuola, a D-rank awakened individual, would definitely be severely injured and on the verge of death. I stared at the menacing, fiery lion, and the pent-up annoyance that had been building up inside me finally erupted. All I wanted was a decent meal, to be an ordinary person. Why were there always so many oblivious flies bothering me? I sighed, picked up the stainless steel plate I had just eaten from, and with a swift movement, stood directly in front of Jiang Shuola. The majestic, fiery lion slammed into the plate in my hand. There was no deafening explosion, nor did flames spread across the sky. With an incredibly quick, slight tremor of my wrist, I used about a 10/millionth of my strength to deflect the impact of the fiery lion back along the edge of the plate. Boom! A terrifying, invisible shockwave exploded outwards from the plate. Chu Wenwu and his classmates didn't even have time to scream before they were blown off the rooftop like kites with broken strings. They flew through the air with a whoosh and landed miserably in a pile of pants drying outside the opposite boys' dormitory building, lying there in the wind. The rooftop fell silent instantly. Yura's hand, gripping the sword, trembled slightly uncontrollably. She clutched my cafeteria tray, which wasn't even scratched, and swallowed hard. Set within the damned Christian system of the Academy, once a rank duel is officially initiated, the stage can be cancelled midway unless a winner is determined in the arena. 2 days later, the Academy's open-air theater was packed. All sorts of outrageous rumors had already spread throughout the campus. Some said I was a reclusive master, while others rushed to make a batch of legendary E-class plates, and sold them at high prices in the surrounding stands, creating an exceptionally hot market. I stood at the edge of the ring, looking down at my loosely tied shoelace on my left foot, which drew a burst of laughter from the stands. I rubbed my temples helplessly. My plan for today was very clear: to stage a scene where Chu Wenwu was pinned to the ground and subdued, to lose the match cleanly and decisively, and to completely quell the absurd commotion. Opposite him, Chu Wenwu, clad in a priceless set of enchanted heavy armor, appeared like a gleaming golden war god. He had only been rescued from the warehouse clothes rack 2 days prior, and was filled with rage, immediately unleashing his strongest weapon upon stepping onto the stage. Die, you monstrous, pretentious devil! Chu Wenwu roared, his magical power surging wildly around him, and with each breath he summoned 6 enormous, fiery lions. The temperature of the entire duel instantly soared to an extremely terrifying level, even distorting the air itself. The audience in the stands gasped in surprise. Even senior elites would find it difficult to withstand such a powerful attack head-on. I watched as the 6 fiery lions, their jaws agape, lunged at me, and I was just about to feign weakness and collapse. But at that moment, due to the intense stimulation from the infant, I inadvertently wasted a tiny, imperceptible amount of my magical power. It was this trace of unparalleled pressure from the obsidian rift overlord that instantly froze the 6 ferocious, fiery lions in place. The rage in their eyes instantly transformed into extreme fear. With a whimper, they turned around in unison, wagging their tails at me like the most docile lapdogs. Then, they swarmed forward, pinning their kin, Chu Wenwu, beneath them. Holy crap! What's going on? Let me go! You bunch of traitorous beasts! Chu Wenwu was pressed down until his face turned red and his neck bulged. In the end, he was buried upside down in the granite floor of the arena by the weight of the 6 lions, while his legs, which were tattered and covered in gold armor, thrashed wildly outside. The entire venue fell into dead silence once again. The audience's jaws dropped to the floor, and the sound of a pin dropping could be clearly heard. No, this script won't work. If this continues, my identity will absolutely be ruined. I quickly ran over, snatched the steel spear Chuunwoo had dropped beside him, quietly tossed us outside, then crouched down, leaned close to his ear, and said through gritted teeth in a voice only the two of us could hear. "Hey! Get up and punch me right now! Harder! I'm begging you, just act out a defeat for me, or I'll shove you into the school's septic tank tonight. I swear I'll do it!" Chuunwoo was stunned by my inexplicable threat. He actually pulled his head out of the pit, and, feeling humiliated and bewildered, threw a punch that landed softly on my chest. That force wasn't even enough to tickle me. But I used it as an excuse to make a scene. I shouted in an extremely exaggerated manner, "What powerful punches! My internal organs are all shattered!" Immediately, I felt as if I had been struck by a high-speed, levitating train, and I was launched into the air. I traced a perfect parabola in midair, my body crashing through 3 layers of high-strength protective walls at the edge of the arena, and finally, with a piercing cracking sound, I slammed heavily into the stands, knocking over 7 or 8 chairs in the process. Amidst the ruins, I precisely raised my right shoulder, and with a trembling voice, I shouted in grief and indignation, I lost! The power of the Fire Lion Guild is indeed unfathomable. I am utterly convinced. Silence reigned. The master stared in disbelief at me, who was covered in rags but hadn't even broken a single patch of skin in the ruins, and then looked at Chuunwoo, who was on the arena with a suspicious look on his face and was being pressed down by the Fire Lion. A full half-minute passed before the referee, wiping the cold sweat from his brow, raised his flag and stammered, Su Jian fell off the ring. Chuunwoo is dead." After the carnival farce ended, the entire vanguard awakened went completely mad. Rumors spread like wildfire among the students. Some said I was actually the reincarnation of a reclusive master, who habitually used such farcical defeats to temper Chuunwoo's Tao heart. Others claimed with certainty that Chuunwoo and I were actually sworn brothers, and that the competition that day was entirely a charade staged by the two of them. At the center of the storm, Chuunwoo fell into a complete daze afterward. Rumors circulated that the fetus had only narrowly escaped death thanks to my secret guidance, which the proud and arrogant Chuunwoo simply couldn't accept. So, for the next week, Chuunwoo became my veritable human accessory. Wherever I go, I see him sneaking around following my younger brother. When I get food at the cafeteria, he silently observes the sounds I make when I use chopsticks. When I go to the library, he keeps a close eye on how often I turn the pages. What's even more impressive is that whenever I casually look for a flaw or two before he gets away, I dare not speak, and he can conjure up countless little notes in his mind, then frantically go into seclusion to practice his skills again. In just 14 days, this kid's strength actually broke through from B level to B+ level through self-delusion and insane competition. That night, as Chuunwoo stood before the fountain in the center of the academy, tears streaming down his face, he looked up to the sky and roared, thanking me for the strict training he had given him that day. I was squatting under a tree, holding half an ice pop, watching his mentally broken state, my heart filled with deep guilt and helplessness. I really just wanted to slack off. Why is it so hard to be an ordinary good-for-nothing these days? Finally, the day of the midterm exams arrived. According to the Academy's rules, the midterm exam consisted of 2 parts, a written test and a practical exam. On the day of the written test, I was in the exam hall, looking at the ancient topics on analyzing the energy remnants of high-level monsters on the exam paper. All I could think of were images of bargaining with those ancient emperors in the Obsidian Rift. To maintain my image as an F-rank loser, I changed several standard answers that were universally accepted to flawed and incorrect solutions, only managing to get 19 points. For me, 19 points is an absolutely perfect score. However, A's practical midterm exam completely shattered my peaceful life. As arranged by our instructors, the students in each group were collectively transported to an abandoned city specifically for the final simulation exercise. Our task was simple: hunt low-level simulated monsters within the city and calculate our scores. A few of us from Class E gathered together, and after some discussion, we unanimously decided to find a secluded bakery to hide in and peacefully get through the 3 days of exams. The iPad remained stable and lasted normally for 7 minutes. Boom! Without warning, a colossal tomb burst open in the center of the simulated city's sky. A piercing alarm instantly blared throughout the entire city. What on earth could this be? All the simulated monsters that had been projected as holographic projections vanished, replaced by an astonishingly terrifying pressure. That was a real rift. And it was imbued with a pure magical aura that felt very familiar to me, an aura from the other side of the obsidian rift. What's going on? Isn't this a mock exam? Why are there really high-level rifts? Lee Do-yoon was so frightened that he dropped his business card on the floor and hid behind the counter, his face pale. Before anyone could react, a low-level ogre dressed in a violent style strode out of the rift and roared toward the street where we were hiding. I stared at the enormous, menacing creature, my brow furrowing slightly. Why would such a dangerous entity exist within the Academy's simulated city? Seeing the cannibal's giant hand about to smash the bakery's glass window, I didn't even bother to stand up and just casually slapped it from a distance. Smack! A crisp slap echoed across the empty space. The once majestic, ravenous demon didn't even have time to scream before its massive body was sent flying backward at several times the speed of sound, like a street being blasted away. It traversed 12 high-rise buildings before finally embedding itself deep into the surrounding air raid shelters, its fate unknown. The students in the bakery were all stunned, staring at me with wide eyes. I calmly withdrew my hand, picked up a pineapple bun, took a bite, turned to look at the dumbfounded crowd, and explained seriously. Didn't you hear that? It must be that the gas pipes in the shop next door have been in disrepair for years and exploded, blowing that strange-looking gorilla away. These days, construction work is really causing a lot of harm. Lee Do-yoon swallowed hard and nodded mechanically. Yeah. Yes, the gas quality these days is terrible. I'll have to give him a business card sometime. Before everyone could recover from the gas explosion, a strange ripple of void suddenly appeared at the center of the rift. Immediately afterward, a void apostle clad in a long silver robe, his body flowing with countless ancient runes, stepped out into the air. This ruthless figure possessed a deadly and terrifying power. Even a bronze artifact in its prime could easily slay a level-awakened individual with a mere flick of his wrist. The moment he reached puberty, his eyes instantly locked onto me in the crowd. The void apostle bowed slightly and proclaimed in a hoarse yet reverent voice, "Lord Boundless Hunter! Your former troops on the other shore welcome you back to your homeland." The entire place fell into a deathly silence. I almost choked on a pineapple bun. I turned around abruptly and saw Instructor Park Kwang-soo, who was panting and about to urge him to come to our aid. I quickly cut off the Void Apostle's words and shouted, "Instructor Park! You're here! It's this masked, non-mainstream young man who threatened to steal our class's midterm exam points and even said he'd report you for smoking cheap cigarettes during work hours. You have to eliminate him in the name of the moon." Instructor Park Kwang-soo, who had just arrived at the scene with a cigarette dangling from his mouth, was left speechless. The Void Apostle was clearly surprised that the legendary Sky Hunter would use such a childish method to shift the blame, and stood there stunned for a moment. "Stop talking nonsense! You dare to steal student points on my turf? You're asking for trouble." Park Kwang-soo was a ruthless man. Although he knew perfectly well that this was definitely a tough opponent, since I had already shifted the blame onto him, he gritted his teeth, drew his alloy longsword, and charged forward. Of course, the outcome of Park Kwang-soo's charge was predictable. In just one exchange, he was blasted away by the spatial turbulence casually unleashed by the Void Apostle, crashing heavily into the wall. Seeing that my classmates were about to find a flaw, I sighed helplessly. It seemed I had no choice but to stretch my muscles today. I slowly stood up, patted the bread slices off my clothes, and casually snapped my fingers in a clever and agile motion. Boom! An indescribable, terrifying pressure vanished from my body, even a fraction of my justice vanished. That arrogant Void Apostle didn't even have time to entertain the thought of resistance before being lifted into the air by this absolute power. I grabbed his collar and pulled him back to the edge of the rift like a chick, then kicked him in the butt, sending him flying through the rift into the high clouds at an altitude of 10,000 meters. Tell your master's back. I clapped my hands and rolled my eyes at the crack in the sky. I'm on vacation right now. If you dare send flies to bother me while I'm having breakfast again, believe me, I'll turn your piss into a roasting oven and burn it down. Bang! With a muffled thud, the crack closed completely in the clouds, and the sky returned to clear. The entire audience of teachers and students stared blankly at the scene, their minds completely fried. The awkwardness was so palpable that even the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves could be heard clearly. In a split second, Li Daoyun was the first to react. He rushed forward, shouting with fervor, "That was amazing! Classmates! Did you all see that? Su Jian accidentally triggered the Academy's most treasured ancient artifact, borrowing the divine power of his ancestors to kick the terrorist away. He truly deserves to be the pride of our Class E." Jiang Shuola and Pei Milio exchanged a glance and immediately nodded frantically. Absolutely! It's the power of the secret treasure! It's amazing! Instructor Park Kwang-soo, who had crawled out of the rubble, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, glared at me fiercely, and spat out his cigarette butt. He then shouted at me. Ahem! That's right! That's the Academy's newly developed riot control weapon, an absolute top secret. Anyone who dares to leak even a single word will have their graduation revoked. Although everyone verbally covered up this absurd explanation, I knew in my heart that some things had completely become uncontrollable. Sure enough, on the afternoon the midterm exams ended, there was a knock on the principal's office door. Seated in the principal's chair was Bai Minghao, the Academy's highest leader and a veteran S-class awakened known as the Iron Saint. He slowly adjusted his glasses and slammed two thick files onto the table. The first document is an analysis of the weaknesses and loopholes in all my fabricated identity documents. The second document is a yellowed old photo of the Battle of Bushio Mountain. In the photo, a small figure with a helmet is standing on the head of a giant beast. Although the face is not visible, the iconic backhand sword grip and unique walking habits are clearly those of me, who was famous throughout the world back then. Bai Minhao looked up, his gaze deep as he looked at me, and slowly said, Su Jian, or should I call you the Boundless Hunter? Your little habit of hating onions hasn't changed at all over the years. I pulled out a chair and sat down with a wry smile, shrugging my shoulders. Principal, since you already know, I have nothing to explain. I'll just focus on finishing my 3 years of schooling peacefully, until I end up at the stalls outside. The mess outside is probably not something you can choose. Bai Minghao interrupted me, pointing solemnly out the window. Since your return, miniature spatial rifts carrying obsidian rift energy have appeared all over the country. Something is following your trail all the way to Earth. After a pause, Bai Minghao suddenly changed the subject and looked at me seriously. By the way, was that cafeteria tray you used to block the flames of the fire lion really an ancient treasure? The school's finance department is about to ask you for reimbursement. Although the principal's eyes were as sharp as X-rays, I stubbornly insisted that the cafeteria tray was just a cheap stainless steel product bought from a street vendor, and also promised to clean the student council office for the next 3 months. I finally managed to fool this veteran S-class awakened person. I thought life would continue in this uneventful way, but fate clearly harbored a deep hatred for my slacking off plan. On the 3rd day after the regular midterm exams, the Academy issued a school-wide announcement, in response to the Awakener administration's call for cross-regional joint training, all class members will join forces with the top-ranked elite class of the year to conduct field training on Jeju Island, located in the Southern Sea. The students will need to enter a designated Class B rift for effective team training. When I saw the words, Jeju Island Class B Fisher, on the bulletin board, my eyelids twitched violently. If I remember correctly, when I was 8 years old, I was eating grilled squid in that very sea area when I got annoyed by a noisy sea dragon and carelessly swatted it into the seabed mud with a discarded plastic spoon. This is definitely not a coincidence. There are clearly some historical legacies buried there from that time. I immediately decided to feign illness. That afternoon, I lay on a hospital bed in the school clinic, a high-end mercury thermometer, specially designed to test the sleep of those who had awakened to extraordinary abilities, tucked between my fingers. In order to appear as an ordinary, sickly F-level cripple, I deliberately suppressed the magic power within my body to the maximum extent. As a result, my hand trembled slightly, a sudden burst of temperature caused by the natural radiation from my physical body. With a crack, the expensive military-grade thermometer melted into a pool of shimmering glass right under my armpit. The school doctor and nurse came over with a medical record book, looked down at the liquid, then at me who hadn't changed expression, and wrote on the medical record without any nervousness, Patient Su Jian, sudden onset of extremely high fever of 100,000 degrees Celsius, mental state is good, it is recommended to immediately carry out high-intensity outdoor training to reduce fever physically. And so, no matter how much I protested, I was forcibly crammed onto a special transport plane bound for Jeju Island. Besides the eccentric group from Class E, there was another unique and eye-catching presence in the group, Yushiran, the top student in the grade and an A-level ice mage. She wore a spotless white school uniform, always carrying a thick ancient magic tome, and maintained a cold and aloof demeanor that kept strangers at bay. The transport plane quickly landed at the training base on Jeju Island. The so-called Class B rift entrance was located deep within a lush tropical jungle. The moment you step inside the crevice, the humid, hot air carries a strange, unsettling magic. The scenery here, however, is serene. Towering blue-purple trees rise from the ground, a massive rock suspends itself in midair as if under gravity, and clear streams flow gently. But the more eerie and strange the calm was, the more uneasy I felt. Everyone be careful, there are slight distortions in the spatial structure here. Yu-Su stopped and gently drew her slender fingers in the air, instantly creating a faint ice-blue magic shield that enveloped her within 3 meters. I ignored her overreacting and instead crouched down to examine a spot near my feet. There, a remarkably vivid shoe print remained, its edges faintly entwined with a black halo, the void energy that had emerged from beyond the obsidian rift. There are other beings who have smuggled themselves from that desolate place to Earth. Roar! Before I could even warn them, a deafening roar suddenly erupted from the bushes of Manhattan. A B-level iron-armed baboon, its size comparable to a small truck, burst forth from all directions, its eyes bloodshot, brandishing its massive fists, and completely surrounding our team. It's a troop of iron-armed baboons! Everyone, form a defensive formation! Chu Wenwu shouted, his flaming longsword instantly unsheathed, assuming a posture ready to wreak havoc. The rooster, General, seemed to be dissatisfied with these strange long-feathered creatures. Before anyone else could react, it flapped its wings and took the initiative to go forward, pecking hard at the nose of the leading baboon with its firm beak, exchanging insults with a Class B monster from afar. Just then, the largest iron-armed baboon leaped down from the treetop with a bright smile, its enormous paw aimed straight at the trembling Li Duyun. Li Duyun tumbled and fell to the ground, closing his eyes in despair. I sighed and casually plucked an ordinary green leaf from a blue tree beside me. Call out! The emerald green leaf flicked slightly at my fingertips, transforming into a streak of light almost imperceptible to the naked eye. With a series of crisp, plop sounds, the delicate leaf not only instantly downed the heavy armor of a baboon, but also, with undiminished momentum, snapped off a third giant tree, 7 trees so thick they would take 7 people to encircle, flipping through the air in a flamboyant arc before finally flying steadily back into my palm. Looking at the baboons around me who had instantly collapsed and died, I calmly cut off a piece of green leaf that was stained with tree sap and stuffed it into my mouth. In front of the stunned crowd, I chewed it a few times and swallowed it, thus destroying the traces of the corpses. What? What just happened? Chuanwu rubbed his eyes, looking at the severed trees and monster corpses on the ground, and fell into a state of serious existential doubt. Before everyone could react, a piercingly loud laugh suddenly came from the largest floating tremor in midair. As expected of the young king back then, even a casually picked piece of paper still exudes the grandeur of sweeping across the void. A white-haired man with long, slender legs, dressed in black, walked out with extremely slow steps. One of his eyes was intact, while the other was tightly covered by a metal eye patch engraved with strange, otherworldly runes. Upon seeing this uninvited guest, his pupils contracted slightly. Lachlan. I never expected to run into this old acquaintance here. Back in the depths of the Obsidian Rift, Rockin and I fought side by side for 30 years, enduring countless void tides. But then, after one war, this guy suddenly betrayed us and joined the enemy camp. I, for some reason, thought he had died in the collapse explosion, never imagining he would end up on Earth. Lachlan. I narrowed my eyes, my voice deepening. What exactly do you want from Earth? Rockin stood atop the awe-inspiring floating platform, looking down at me with a cruel smile. Little King, did you really think you were retreating when you escaped from the Obsidian Rift? You're too naive. You deliberately left a part of your core power and sense of justice behind in the other shore imprint, but now, that half of you is awakening. As soon as he finished speaking, Lachlan suddenly raised his wrist and clenched his fist in the air. Boom! The entire Class B Rift domain was being forcibly eroded and altered. The once peaceful tropical jungle collapsed with a deafening roar, and countless terrifying monsters formed from shadow and void energy crawled out from the ground, the air teeming with a nauseating, decaying swarm. In an instant, it became a truly forbidden and desolate place. Enemy attack! All troops defend! Surant's face turned pale as he frantically flipped through the magic tome in his hand, causing countless ice walls to rise from the ground. I cursed inwardly. I absolutely cannot unleash my full magic here. If the space leaks out, not only will those old guys on Earth sense it instantly, but even the real terrifying master behind the Obsidian Rift will lock onto my location directly through the signal. Listen up! I grabbed Chuanwu, who was trembling beside me, and shouted, If you don't want to die, lead everyone in charge. Run this way! I didn't give Chuanwu a chance to refute. I grabbed him by the back of his collar, and used him as a human projectile and a trailblazer. I used the defensive power of his enchanted heavy armor to carve a bloody path through the dense horde of void monsters. Su Jian! You son of a bitch! Why are you using me as a shield again? Chuanwu let out a heart-wrenching scream in midair, wildly swinging his long sword, and surprisingly, he managed to cut down several void demons by sheer luck. This kid, relying solely on the resilience training I gave him, unleashed a fighting power that even he himself couldn't believe at this moment. I led the group in constantly dodging the tremors as we floated in the air. With each wolf-like dodge, we were secretly stomping on the ground at a deadly and tricky angle. Jiang Shuola, while wielding her spare spear to stab at monsters, relentlessly pursued my footsteps. As a spear-wielding prodigy, she quickly noticed something amiss. I wasn't actually fighting, but rather using the aftershocks of each of my hand strikes to create what appeared to be an enormous sealing magic circle on the ground. I see. Jiang Shuola gritted his teeth and shouted, Everyone, attack him! Draw the monster's attacks towards the area he drew in the circle. While the members of Class C were indeed like that, in this life-or-death situation, their trust in me left them with no doubts. Li Daoyun desperately cast a weak healing aura on his master, barely enough to stop the bleeding. Pei Miru directed the rooster, General, to peck at the monster's eyes everywhere, while Yu Shiran used a large area of frost to block the monster's retreat. Just as Lachlan's sword came down with the devastating power of sunlight, I stomped my feet heavily on the ground. Buzz! The giant magic circle on the ground, outlined by countless aftershocks of the battle, was instantly activated. Countless dazzling chains of light shot up from the ground, like giant, active pythons, instantly binding Lockin tightly in midair, rendering him unable to move. Rockin', that's enough of our reminiscing. I patted the portrait in my hand, looked up at the black-clad man trapped in midair, and said coldly, "Tell me everything you know about the other I know." Instead of panicking, Rockin burst into wild laughter. "Little King, you're late. The obsidian gate can no longer be closed." The rift in the sky was completely torn apart in that instant. A beam of light, far darker than the sun, poured down, and deep within that rift, a beam of cold light, countless times larger than the entire moon, opened in a circle, casting its gaze upon the mortal world from its lofty position. The entire Jeju Island training base was being destroyed, and space began to collapse. Rockin's figure faded into the swirling black mist, leaving only one sentence echoing in the air. "He's come for you, carrying all the anger you lost back then." Boom! With a loud bang, a powerful shockwave hurled our master away, sending him crashing back onto the parking lot on Jeju Island. As the alarm blared, reporters from the West, high-ranking officials from the Awakened Bureau, and elites from various families rushed to the scene, instantly crowding the parking lot. I scrambled to my feet, staring at the countless dark, gaping holes and flashing lights around me. In a flash of inspiration, I grabbed a squashed rubber duck from a roadside stall. Clutching it tightly to my chest, I sat on the ground, trembling, my eyes glazed over, muttering incoherently. "Don't come any closer. I'm so scared." Thanks to this little rubber duck and my superb acting skills, my classmates from Class E and I finally managed to escape from the siege of the reporters. After the harrowing training exercise on Jeju Island, the entire Vanguard Awakener Academy immediately sounded the highest level red alert. The presidents of the great Awakener guilds, the nation's top combatants, swarmed into Seoul like sharks smelling blood, completely surrounding the school. The entire nation convened to discuss the true nature of the obsidian essence that had flashed through the cracks that day. To avoid this group of incomplete interrogations, I decisively chose to hide among the scholars in the Academy's dark, damp, and ancient library, a place even ghosts usually wouldn't bother visiting. The air here is thick with the smell of old paper and cheap preservatives. I'm sitting in a corner, munching on an apple one stole from the cafeteria, idly watching the fully armed patrolling guards outside the window, with that oblivious rooster, General, lying next to me. Just as I was about to yawn and close my eyes, a deadly, abrupt sigh suddenly rang out from the shadow of a row of huge bookshelves in front of me. I suddenly realized what was happening and looked in the direction of the sound. There, amidst several bronze statues covered by covers, stood a burly middle-aged man with a full head of white hair but sharp, eagle-like eyes. He wore a well-tailored military-style overcoat, and was polishing a military dagger, devoid of any magical power, with a piece of leather pre-treated on the arm. Nam Myej. A top 3 S-class national-level awakened individual in the country, and an old comrade-in-arms who fought alongside me during the Obsidian Cataclysm. My heart skipped a beat, and I knew I was in trouble. Although I look almost exactly the same as that 8-year-old kid I was back then, some things are ingrained in my bones. Sure enough, Nanma stopped what he was doing. He didn't move immediately, but squinted slightly, as if trying to recall some extremely ancient memory. He walked towards me step by step, his heavy military boots creaking on the smooth floor. Nanmuja's voice was low and hoarse, carrying the authority of someone who had long held a high position. "You've been sitting here the whole time. And that unpleasant laziness about you really reminds me of an old friend of mine that I disliked but had to admire." As I chewed on my apple, I shrank further into the shadows and said in a hoarse, amplified voice, "Uncle, you've mistaken me for someone else. I'm just an ordinary F-rank awakener. I don't even dare to step on ants on the roadside. How could I possibly know someone as important as you?" The voice is wrong, but that subconscious eye-rolling motion is exactly the same. Nanmuja snorted coldly, a complex emotion flashing in his eyes. Then, without warning, he moved. There were no dazzling scenes, no exaggerated magical shocks, just a simple, realistic straight punch. Yet the terrifying atmosphere brought by that punch instantly blasted thousands of ancient books from the surrounding bookshelves into countless flying pieces of paper. The force of that punch shattered the small mountain. I didn't even blink. My body leaned back and exaggerated the use of force to crash into my brother's concrete wall. Boom! I smashed a huge hole in the entire wall. I flew through the library like a sack of potatoes and crashed heavily onto the spacious lawn and the outdoor courtyard. I rolled several times on the ground before finally lying motionless on my back. Nanmuja strode out of the large hole, his face dark. He looked at me, lying motionless on the ground, covered in bits of grass, and his lips twitched a few times with agitation. He walked over, kicked my shin, and cursed irritably. "Stop pretending! That punch I just threw didn't even use a tenth of your strength. Are you going to keep pretending?" Seeing that I couldn't keep up the act any longer, I had no choice but to dust myself off and slowly get up from the ground. I flicked a large patch off my clothes and sighed helplessly. "Uncle Nan, long time no see. Your temper has changed so much. I told you back then that getting angry often causes wrinkles. Look at the wrinkles around your eyes now, they've got flies trapped in them." Upon hearing this, Nanmuja was jolted awake. He stared intently at my young face, his eyelids reddening slightly with shock. He grabbed my collar, his voice trembling. "It really is you, kid. We even held a state funeral for you back then, erecting an empty coffin and a statue for you in the heart of Seoul. You have no idea how much hair I lost writing your biography. Oh, let's not talk about this year." I scratched my head awkwardly. The signal was bad in the rift, which made me miss my flight back. Besides, the state funeral was quite lively. I even peeked at it through the holographic projection inside. The Swana playing by the honor guard was quite festive. Nanmuja was so angry he almost spat out blood. He raised his hand to give me a sharp rap on the head, but seeing my defiant attitude, he finally sighed helplessly and pulled me into a tight hug. Although the smell of tobacco on the old man made it hard for me to breathe, the feeling of a long-awaited reunion still touched my heart. That evening, Nanmuja secretly sneaked into my student dormitory. When the rooster, General, saw him, it surprisingly did not attack. Instead, it walked over like a big shot who had met an old friend, with an air of indifference. The high-level battle pet at Nanmuja's feet stared at each other for a long time, and finally even generously shared a grain of millet with it. "Su Jian, the situation outside is more serious than you think." Nanmuja sat on the edge of my single bed, which was as hard as an iron plate, his face solemn and his voice low. "When you came out of the obsidian rift this time, were you really sure that you were a complete tale? On Friday, the Bureau's monitoring equipment captured an extremely strange scene in the underground of Seoul. It was definitely an energy blockade from the other side of the obsidian rift." I poured Nanmuja a glass of water, and my face gradually grew a little more furrowed. I didn't reveal the whole story about smiling, resentful teenage clone of myself, but only vaguely said, "Uncle, what are you worried about? But some things, after all, are things of yesterday. Since I was able to drive those monsters back, I can do the same now." "Nonsense!" Nanmuja slammed his hand on the table, looking at me with exasperation. "Do you think you're still the same sky hunter who could slay dragons single-handedly? The whole world is watching the Academy, and there are even mysterious forces stirring things up in the shadows. Listen to me, leave here and go to a national-level shelter, where you'll be protected by the highest defenses." "No." I shook my head without hesitation, my tone calm yet exuding an undeniable courage. "Uncle, do you know why I like staying in this lousy school?" Nanmuja was taken aback. "Why? For these mediocre students in Class E who are always causing you trouble?" "Yeah." I smiled, my gaze fixed on the dimly lit campus outside. "Here, no one will kneel down and call me savior, No one will print my image in textbooks for people to worship. Every morning I worry about not being able to get braised pork. I have to deal with boring midterm exams. I have to face that short guy Jiang Shula with his cheap spear that he's always brandishing. And I have to listen to Li Daoyan's fair assessment of his tattered business card. I've waited 3 years for this kind of life. Seeing the seriousness in my eyes, Nanmuja opened his mouth, but ultimately said nothing. He simply drank the glass of water in one gulp, got up, and left. However, less than 10 minutes after Nanmuja left. Sizzle! Sizzle! The magical lights on the dormitory walls in the corridor suddenly began flickering wildly and emitting a piercing blare. Immediately afterward, a sharp, piercing air raid siren sounded throughout the dome of the entire Hive Academy. Something's happened at the underground training ground. My expression changed slightly, and I grabbed my skirt and ran outside. By the time I arrived at the underground field, all my classmates had already arrived. Jiang Shou gripped the newly repaired spear tightly, Yushiran exuded a chilling aura, Chuanwu gritted his teeth and assumed a fighting stance, Li Daoyun held a thick spa business card in his hand, Pei Miru rode on the back of the rooster. General! And Instructor Park Kwangsu stood solemnly at the entrance, a cigarette dangling from his lips. Instructor, what's going on inside? I walked over quickly. Park Kwangsu took a deep drag on his cigarette, his tone full of confidence. I don't know. Just now, the energy shield of the underground restricted area was suddenly violently destroyed, and a high-energy crack of unknown level appeared inside. Moreover, that aura had a chillingly familiar feel to it. As they spoke, the heavy steel doors of the underground training ground slid open with a thud towards Manhattan. In the center of the dark tabletop, the once bright magical lamps were completely covered by a layer of cold black frost. Directly above the center of the tabletop, a small crack, no bigger than a mirror, floated silently. In the realm of awakened ones, while giant rifts are terrifying, they are often characterized by violent energy and traceable patterns. However, these small rifts, which are precisely compressed to the extreme, often indicate that a strange and terrifying force is being manipulated by humans, and the level of danger increases exponentially. Tap, tap, tap. A subtle sound of footsteps came from the other side of the crack. Then, the slender figure stepped out of the mirror-like crack with unhurried steps. He was a boy who looked to be about 12 years old. He wore a set of black armor with dragon scale patterns that flowed with dark gold, and held a huge greatsword that was far taller than him. He wore a pure black eyeless mask without any facial features. The moment this happened, Nanmuja, who was standing opposite him, was about to step forward to stop him, but he saw that the boy even raised his head and casually flicked his fingers in the air. Boom! Nanmuja, a top 3S class awakened in the country, was sent flying like a cannonball, crashing through 6 load-bearing walls several meters thick in the underground training ground, and finally sinking into the ruins, his fate unknown. The entire room fell into absolute silence. Even the host gasped, staring in utter terror at the seemingly harmless-looking boy. The boy lifted his arms and casually removed the eyeless face mask, revealing a handsome face. That was a face exactly like mine in my teenage years. You! Chuanwu was so frightened that he almost dropped his sword. He looked back and forth between me and the boy with a terrified gaze. How can there be 2 Su giants? What kind of monster is this? The boy coldly raised his head, his expressionless eyes fixed on me, his voice filled with a deep-seated resentment and mockery. Main body. You're living quite well here. Eating inferior cafeteria food, playing house with these ants, using all the power we gained last year in the Obsidian Rift with our blood on the bone melting of these puppets? I looked at the clone in front of me and sighed heavily. When I broke free from the Obsidian Rift this year, in order to completely heal the curse of that desolate place, I did indeed use forbidden techniques to separate the evil forces within my own country, including their combat instincts and excesses, leaving them on the other side of the rift. I had always thought that he should have long since dissipated in the turbulent currents of time, but I never expected that this guy would no longer exist. Moreover, After absorbing the void energy deep within the rift, he actually grew into an independent, terrifying being, imbued with all my violence and bloodlust. You have been abandoned in the darkness for too long. The boy slowly raised the great sword in his hand, and a blinding obsidian light began to flow from the blade. Today, in front of my master, I will personally cut off your laughable weakness and reclaim the power that belongs to us. The air in the underground training ground seemed to be instantly drawn into a vacuum. The boyish clone, bearing the exact same face as me, was surrounded by a pungent, obsidian-like gale. The great sword in his hand hung limply, the energy overflowing from its blade already carving countless spiderweb-like cracks into the ground. Su Jian! What on earth is going on? Chu Wenwu's hand gripping the long sword trembled slightly, beads of cold sweat appeared on his forehead, and his eyes were filled with fear and seriousness. This brat! How come the magical pressure emanating from him is 1,000 times more terrifying than the level of the monster from before? Yushiran and Jiang Shuola stepped forward simultaneously, each activating their inner magic to create a shield at the forefront of Class E. Although their legs were trembling, either of them chose to take a step back. Li Daoyun even shakily pulled out a protective healing card, saying to me with a wry smile, "Brothers, if a real fight breaks out later, I guess my final card will only be useful for holding my ashes. You guys better watch out." Looking at these usually talkative companions who stood firmly in front of me in crucial moments, I felt a warmth in my heart, and my somewhat irritable mood, which had been bothered by troubles, instantly calmed down. I sighed, took a step forward, and blocked them all from my brothers. "Hey kid," I said helplessly, looking at the resentful boy clone. "I left you on the edge of the rift this year to maintain spatial balance, so you wouldn't end up hurting each other. How can you be so insensible? Fighting outside is too tiring, wouldn't it be better to hand in your homework on time every day?" "Shut up!" Upon hearing this, the boy's clone's eyes instantly surged with a brutal killing intent that reached our very core. "You damned coward! You abandoned our anger, you abandoned your ambition, hiding in this peaceful world like a coward! Today, I'll crush everything here, and let's see how you pretend then." As soon as he finished speaking, the boy's clone vanished from the spot. "That's too fast. That's the highest speed that surpasses the rules of parallel universes." Almost the instant he disappeared, a devastating sword aura was already upon my face. Everyone in the audience gasped in shock, and even the air itself seemed to be torn apart by the sword aura, producing a piercing wail. I no longer maintained the power within my body. At that moment, I slightly loosened the first layer of the seal. Boom! An invisible shockwave exploded outwards from me. The structural creaking of the polluted concrete beneath the entire Vanguard Awakener Academy resounded with unbearable strain, and all the magic monitoring devices within hundreds of grids simultaneously and violently spiked to zero. Windows shattered across most of Seoul at the same time, and the last Awakener on the street collapsed to their knees without warning, their backs instantly soaked with cold sweat. Just as the giant sword of the boy's clone was about to strike, my right index and middle fingers darted forward with pinpoint accuracy. Clang! The crisp, metallic clang was deafening. Two fingers, with effortless ease, once again gripped the obsidian greatsword, powerful enough to split mountains and shatter rocks. The boy's clone's pupils contracted sharply, his face filled with shock. "How is this possible? Your power was clearly suppressed by the rules of this world. Why?" "Because you're too impetuous." I shook my head and exerted a little force. Fighting isn't about having a big balance. It's about skill and technique. With a flick of my wrist, I sent him and his sword flying back several meters. The boy's clone slid across the ground before regaining his balance. He looked up at me, his eyes filled not only with resentment but also with a sudden, instinctive horror. However, misfortunes never come singly. The moment we clashed, the small rift above us suddenly expanded wildly as if stimulated, growing more than 10 times its original size in an instant. It was filled with dozens of void apostles, each comparable to a demigod. At the forefront, the white-haired man, Rakan, who had previously appeared on Jeju Island, bowed respectfully and addressed the young avatar before him in a deep voice. "We respectfully welcome the king back to his throne." It wasn't until this moment that I finally understood that the reason Wakan opposed it was not because he had defected to the enemy, but because he had been loyal to the part of the sanctioning force that I left on the other side of the rift from the very beginning. "Ha ha! Main body, did you see that?" The boy's clone laughed maniacally, his laughter filled with twisted pleasure. "Not only me, the entire Void Army has been waiting for this day. I'm destined to tear these Ansulinger over to pieces right before your eyes." It touched the last line of my heart, and my eyes finally turned completely cold. I was hoping to enjoy a few more peaceful days. I suddenly looked up, my gaze sweeping over the approaching Void Apostles. "It seems that unless I completely subdue you, you won't know why the flowers are so red." Actually, as early as Thursday, because of that rooster, General, who sneaks out of the dorms all over the world and likes to cause trouble everywhere, I had secretly made a brief modification to the college's emergency tension diaphragm. 6 sets of self-developed, customized diaphragms can not only accurately identify my old magical characteristics, but also transform into a super cage to suppress all spatial rifts at critical moments. I snapped my fingers crisply, expressionless. Click. In an instant, tens of thousands of magical array eyes hidden deep underground within the Vanguard Awakener Academy simultaneously lit up with dazzling light. A super feedback loop covering the entire ventricle suddenly activated, transforming into countless physical chains of light that whipped runes, appearing out of thin air from all directions. "What is that?" Laka's expression changed drastically. He desperately tried to activate the void magic within his body, but was horrified to find that his power was instantly suppressed by a full 90%. Those Void Apostles who had just stepped out of the rift were entangled by the overwhelming chains of light before they could even unleash their attacks. I took a step forward and instantly appeared in front of the boy's clone. Before he could react, my wrist transformed into a palm, carrying an unparalleled and absolute suppressive force, and lightly imprinted itself on his chest. Boom! Without any suspense, the boy's clone was sent flying backward by the palm strike, like bowling balls being hit, carrying the bodies of the 6 Void Apostles back into the depths of the still enclosed rift. "No! Main body! You can't!" The boy's clone roared in midair, filled with resentment. I grabbed the dumbfounded rooster, General, next to me and slammed it against the edge of the crack like a javelin, shouting, "General, give these bastards a good kick!" The rooster crowed excitedly and triumphantly in the air, stomping its claws hard on the edge of the crack and pecking at Lakan's forehead. Bang! With a deafening roar, the rift closed completely in the void, and all the Void Army seized the unruly youth's clone, forcefully slamming it back to the dark other side. The moment the crack closed, the weathered ceiling of the underground training ground finally gave way, letting out a mournful cry, and a massive concrete block weighing hundreds of pounds crashed down, seemingly destined to bury the students of Class E alive. I casually raised my hand and gently supported it with one palm. The massive concrete block hovered in midair less than half a meter above everyone's heads. I lifted this behemoth with one hand, as if throwing away a piece of scrap wood, and gently moved it to the square and placed it there. I then patted my hands to lighten the dust. The entire underground training ground was completely silent. The business cards in Li Daoyan's hand fluttered to the ground. The magic book in Yusuran's hand fell to the ground and hit her foot. Jiang Shuola opened his mouth wide and almost held onto his spear. Chu Wenwu rolled his eyes and fell straight down, completely unconscious. He felt that his crazy involution and his racking his brains to make up his thoughts were simply a complete cosmic joke. Disguise? In the face of absolute power and the illusionary physicist, disguise has become a complete joke. Looking at my dumbfounded companions, I awkwardly scratched the back of my head and forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. Actually, if I said I really am an F-rank loser, would you believe me? Amidst the ruins of the underground training ground, the air was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard on the ground. Looking at the pairs of eyes staring straight at me, especially Li Diyun's terrified gaze that seemed impossible to shatter, and Kang Soare's resentful expression that said, "So you're the biggest liar all along." I felt an urge to dig a 3-bedroom apartment out of the ground with my eyes right then and there. "Everyone, let me explain." I raised my hand with a dry laugh, trying to make a last-ditch effort. "Actually, this year in the Obsidian Relationship Rift, I really only studied cooking techniques for 3 years. As for that slap just now, it was just the 18 subduing dragon palms that I recently learned, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the Skyless Hunter." Su Jian. Yushiran took a deep breath, silently picked up the ancient demonic script book that had fallen to the ground, and said in a calm yet extremely dangerous tone, "Do you think we like idiots with zero intelligence the most?" As soon as he finished speaking, the ground suddenly trembled. A deafening roar erupted overhead. Immediately afterwards, a rescue aircraft, painted with the highest level search and rescue specifications of the awakened administration, tore through the clouds, forcefully shattering the Academy's air raid shelter dome and hovering in midair. Countless fully armed national-level elite troops and a few high-ranking guild units rappelled down from the ranks like a tidal wave, completely surrounding the underground training ground. Leading the group were Nan Muzha, who had just crawled out of the rubble and was patting himself down, and by Ming Hao, the principal, whose face was ashen. "All right, stop pretending." Nan Muzha rolled his eyes in annoyance, stepped forward and grabbed my shoulder. "That magical power that could make half of Seoul kneel down just now, who else in the whole world could it be but you, a monster who hasn't been serious for decades? You can't even be bothered to make up an excuse. Do you think these old guys are blind?" Principal Bai Minghao pushed up his glasses, looked at the wolf teeth scattered on the ground, then at me, and sighed deeply. "Su Jian, it seems that the finance department really can't record your previous story of the cafeteria plates being ancient treasures. The Bureau's inquiry document has already been sent to my desk. This time, I'm afraid you can no longer continue to audit classes in Class E as an F-level useless person." The giant guild representatives around me looked at me as if I were a priceless treasure, their eyes gleaming with greed, awe, and fanatical fervor. I sighed helplessly, and just as I was about to submit to fate and put on that solemn mask of a savior again, something suddenly happened. Boom! At that moment, the entire sky above the earth completely lost its color. The once cloudless blue sky was torn apart from its very center by an irresistible, absolute darkness. It was a true apocalyptic morning. Across the skies of the world's great cities, countless enormous black spatial fissures appeared in unison. At the very bottom of each fissure, a massive red blood-red mark emerged, composed of graffiti symbols I had scribbled on the wall when I was 8 years old. Immediately afterwards, all radio and television screens around the world, and even everyone's mobile phone, were forcibly occupied at the same time. The cold, icy recording left behind by the boy's alter ego, which had spread to every purple corner of the globe, echoed in the air. "Hand over Su Jian, or the world will vanish into nothingness." Just as the owner was gripped by extreme panic, my phone suddenly malfunctioned. This was a deadly encrypted call. I paused for a moment, then pressed the answer button. A calm, teasing young female voice came through the receiver. "Hello? Is this Lord Wuchyoung Hunter? Let me introduce myself. I am the Witch of the End Rift, and the only one from the Obsidian Rift beyond whom you failed to completely subdue with a spoon this year." I frowned. "What else are you planning to do?" "Don't be so nervous," the witch chuckled. "Your troublesome clone is causing trouble everywhere, making it impossible for me to even enjoy my afternoon tea in peace. I've come to help, but my condition is simple. I want to officially enroll in the Vanguard Awakener Academy, and then I'll be under your jurisdiction." Before I could reply, a deafening explosion suddenly came from the direction of the Academy gate. Boom! Amidst the piercing alarm, the Academy's 100-meter-long alloy gate was slapped into pieces from the outside. A young woman dressed in a gothic black dress, holding a crumpled application form, casually tossed the Academy's security captain aside like trash, and swaggered in. Around her neck, the sky was completely swallowed by the dark obsidian light. The earth split open, and a colossal hand, bound with countless ancient chains and bearing the name of an ancient awakened captain, slowly emerged from the depths of the fissure. Strangely, the terrifying magic emanating from the cracks across the globe did not attack humans. Instead, it scattered and fled frantically as if it had seen a ghost. Even monsters were running for their lives. The true final catastrophe was about to arrive. The piercing alarm and the obsidian light filling the sky converged, making the plaza of the Vanguard Awakener Academy look like the end of the world. The young woman, known as the Witch of the End Rift, slowly walked up to me, carrying a crumpled application form and stepping over alloy shards scattered on the ground. She casually tossed the unconscious security captain to the dumbfounded Nanmuja beside her, then shoved the application form into my arms, smiling broadly as she said, "Headmaster, my tuition has been transferred to the finance department through special channels. From today onwards, I'm a transfer student in Class E. Please take good care of me." I stared at this utterly disastrous woman, and my lips twitched involuntarily. What on earth was going on? The world was about to end, and these sisters still had the mind to go through enrollment procedures. "Su-Jian, this is no time for jokes." Nanmuja caught the security captain and looked up at the sky with a livid face. Above the sky, the colossal hand bound by ancient chains had completely broken free from the rift's restraints. Embedded in the center of its palm was the old version of the awakened captain, symbolizing the ancient era. Looking out from the hand, the obsidian gate was fully open, unleashing a terrifying pressure several times greater than that of Leviathan itself, crashing down upon the earth like a mountain collapsing. At that moment, the leaders of all the countries simultaneously felt as if they had been struck in the chest, and even breathing became extremely difficult. Just at this critical moment, with a muffled thud, the small figure fell awkwardly from midair and crashed heavily onto the academy's lawn. That's the boy's clone that I slapped back into the rift not long ago. At this moment, his dark gold dragon scale armor was completely shattered, and his arrogant and domineering aura had vanished. His face no longer held resentment, but rather a pure despair born of facing absolute terror. The boy's clone scrambled towards me, grabbing my trouser leg, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "Main body. I don't want to destroy the world, I really don't. Everything I did before was just to force you to complete the fusion. Only when the two of us are united again will we be qualified to fight against the true ruler behind the split. It's awakened. It's coming to reap the rewards." Seeing this clone who once wanted to tear me to pieces now pleading for help like a helpless child, the hidden melancholy in my heart was finally calmed by a sense of destiny. I crouched down and reached out to pat his cold knees. "All right, stop crying. Aren't you ashamed?" I sighed helplessly. "Since I dared to break up with you this year, I don't intend for you to carry this mess alone." I looked up and glanced around. Not a single person backed down. Chuanwu gritted his teeth, suppressing the trembling in his legs, and steadily held the reforged spear in front of him. Yu Su's body radiated a chilling aura, making him resemble an ice goddess poised to strike. Li Daowen, though almost crying from fright, resolutely stuck a healing card onto the armor of the classmate beside him. Jiang Shuo pulled the spear on his hand firmly against the ground, his eyes burning with indomitable fighting spirit. Pei Miru patted the rooster, General, beneath her, which was already trembling with fear. Even the usually carefree instructor Park Kwangsu silently relit his cigarette and held the alloy longsword to his chest. On the roof of the teaching building, Locken stood quietly, nodded slightly to me, and pointed the longsword in his hand at the sky. "Su-Jian." Nanmuja took a deep breath, the general gripping his hand tightly. "This old bone of mine will go crazy with you one last time today. If we lose, you'd better rewrite my biography, making me 10 times more handsome than you." I looked at my companions and suddenly laughed. I pulled out the little rubber duck that had been with me all this way, polished smooth from countless handling. This year I used a similar plastic spoon to slay a dragon. Today, I'm going to take this little rubber duck and settle accounts with the biggest behind-the-scenes manipulator in the universe. Okay. I stood up, put the rubber ducky in my pocket, and looked straight up at the huge hand in the sky. Then let these old guys from another world see what it means to be beaten down by society. Just as my thighs stretched out, preparing to merge with the boyish clone beneath my feet, a sudden change occurred. The sheer volume of magic gathered around it unexpectedly activated the holographic projector in the center of the academy, which had been in use for a long time and was usually used to measure student records. The blinding blue beam of light shot up from the ground and transformed into a giant holographic screen, which began to frantically scan everyone in the room. Beep, scan begins. The entire campus was constructed using cold, electronic synthesis. Jiang Shuola, D-level magic, evaluation, troublemaker. Li Daoyun, F-level magic, evaluation, king of minor injuries. Pei Miluo, D-level magic, evaluation, king of chickens. Chu Wenwu, B+ level magic, evaluation, a master of overthinking. Yu Shiran, A-level magic, evaluation, a high and mighty beauty. The data stream on the holographic screen flickered rapidly, and finally, the beam of light fiercely locked onto me as I was about to complete the aggregation. Beep, system alarm. Data overload. Unable to recognize. Forcibly parsing. The guild leaders on the platform held their breath, and even the giant hand in the sky seemed to pause for a moment. Hundreds of people in the audience, watching the global live stream, were glued to the holographic screen. A series of glaring gibberish characters jumped wildly on the screen for a full 5 people. Finally, all the garbled text vanished instantly, and a line of huge, golden Chinese characters appeared clearly. Name, Su Jian, level, current student. The air seemed to freeze completely at that moment. After a full 3 seconds of silence, the witch of the final rift couldn't hold back any longer and burst into laughter, clutching her stomach and shaking with mirth. Immediately afterward, even Rocken, who was attacking, covered his face on the rooftop, managing a wry laugh. Nam Moxiol and instructor Park Kwansu exchanged a glance, then erupted into deafening laughter. I looked at the 3 large characters, school student, shook my head helplessly, but a relieved smile appeared on my lips. Yeah, who cares about the skyless hunters or the rulers of the Obsidian Rift? Right now, I'm just an ordinary student in Class E of the Vanguard Awakener Academy. This result is quite appropriate. I murmured softly, then reached out my wrist and grabbed the hand of the boy's clone. Boom! The 2 world-destroying forces merged perfectly in an instant. My aura did not surge. Instead, it returned to its original simplicity, transforming into an absolute calm that made the entire universe tremble. At that very moment, the obsidian gate above the heavens shattered completely. On the other side of the rift, the ultimate being, standing proudly in the depths of the void and far more ancient than gods and demons, slowly turned to the mortal world and gave a profound smile. The final game has officially begun.